We're having a seizure.
All right, we're just getting everybody in. Hold on just a bit. Okay, it looks like everybody's been admitted. Um, okay, so this is class about the new listing agreement, which is on Zip Forms right now. Today, they released. Gone is the old listing agreement. Gone is the um, uh, cooperating broker compensation agreement. Gone is the mention of cooperating broker compensation agreement in any CAR forms. They are no longer, they do not, they see where the DOJ is going and they do not want any mention of cooperating broker compensation. So you all should be getting a buyer broker agreement if you're working with buyers starting now. It should have been a practice that you got into in the last couple of months. Because come August 17th, when the new rules go into effect, everybody will have to have a buyer broker agreement. And coming in January of 2025, when it becomes law, you will have to have a buyer broker agreement in place. So, so there you go. So let me start this off. Where is this? Why are these not? Right, hold on, my okay. Sorry, my there's some okay. All right. My Zoom is acting up. It wants me to quit and reopen. So otherwise it's not going to be recorded. So I unfortunately think that that's what I need to do. I
Hey,
need
Rich,
to
mine's
knock you all out.
Rich, mine's showing recording on the top. It's saying recording. I had to submit, say yes.
Yeah, but it's not allowing me to share. I mean, I can try it, but if it's not recorded, it's not recorded. All right. Here we go.
Hey, Alan,
Okay.
mute your thing, Alan Rosenberg.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this is what you should be starting off. You go on a listing appointment, and the very first thing you should be bringing him forth to your clients is this form. And this form is the broker compensation advisory. The very first thing that you should be explain how you're paid. That's the new way of how you should be doing your listing appointment. Listing agreement compensation is fully negotiable. You know, and go over with them is that we negotiate a percentage of the purchase price or a flat amount. Doesn't have to be a percentage, and it is fully negotiable as to what you are going to pay me as your broker. Um, can you not? Can everybody see this form?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
It's not Julie's
Thank you.
comment, but I can see it.
Okay. All right. So you negotiate what you are going to be paid as the listing agent. So B talks about additional compensation if buyer is unrepresented, not if you're going to represent the buyer. If they come in and they're unrepresented, you're going to have to be giving them paperwork on behalf of the seller. So it's a little more work, and you can negotiate, if they're willing, some more money to compensate yourself for that. The broker may represent both buyer and seller dual agency. California state allows dual agency, and explain. But if the seller has a problem with you representing the buyer, that's got to stop. You cannot represent the buyer if the seller has a problem with you representing the buyer. That's very important. It has to be agreed to by the seller. Broker agreements with buyers. So this goes into the agreement on the buyer side. You still should be going over this with your seller to know that on the other side, all brokers who are working with buyers have to have a written agreement also. And that compensation is negotiated. I will say to you guys, if you are going to get a buyer broker, I hear a lot of agents are saying, well, buyers don't want to sign this, so I'll just put 0. Guess what, guys? If the seller is willing to pay the buyer's broker, it's only up to the amount that the buyer's broker has negotiated with their buyer. So if you negotiated 0, you're saying that you're willing to get paid 0. So I would not put 0 in that when you're doing a buyer broker agreement. I would negotiate a percentage. As you remember, this is all about selling your worth, selling what you are worth. So that's what you should negotiate. So it talks about requirement that written agreements need to be in writing. That's part of the Code of Ethics, Article 9 of the Code of Ethics, that all agreements need to be in writing. There's nothing, we had a verbal agreement. In real estate, verbal agreements don't exist. When enlisting a real estate broker to represent him, buyers agree to pay the buyer broker when escrow closes, but the person responsible for payment may be negotiated in the transaction. Back to the listing side, you need to point this out to your seller that, look, the buyer may come to you and ask to be compensated, ask to have their broker compensated in the RPA. So you need to go over that with your seller. So that's very important, because that's really how buyers brokers, the main way that buyers brokers are going to be compensated by the seller is through the RPA, and asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker with an SPBB, seller payment of buyer's broker. So really important to explain that to your seller. So the seller pays the compensation. Buyer negotiates for seller to compensate the buyer's broker. A buyer may make a conditional offer to the seller by including a term in the purchase offer, asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker. If the buyer has already agreed to pay their own broker pursuant to a buyer representation agreement. If such a term is included in the purchase order, the request will become one term among many that the seller may accept, reject, or negotiate by way of a counteroffer. The possibility of asking the seller to pay the buyer's contractual compensation obligation option should be discussed when creating a buyer representation agreement and prior to the offer being made. So buyer agent negotiates agreement directly with the seller. If the seller is unrepresented or does not have an exclusive agency relationship with another broker, a buyer's broker may approach that seller. This is FSBOs, guys, asking the seller to sign an agreement, a single party compensation agreement, to pay the buyer's broker. So that's what that's about. Number two, changing practice related to the seller's broker's offer of compensation. History in California, many sellers' brokers use the multiple listing service to make a unilateral offer to compensate a buyer's broker who procured a buyer for the seller's property. However, a nationwide NAR settlement prohibits the seller's broker from using an MLS to make such an offer. Sorry, I lost my place. Buyers and sellers must separately negotiate compensation with their respective brokers as specified above. So, depending on who's this, it's either a seller or a buyer who you're working with, you have them sign this. Any questions about the broker compensation advisory, which you should be going over with both sellers and with buyers?
Yes, I have a question, Rich.
Sure.
So in the event the seller is not offering any buyer compensation, buyer broker has signed an agreement to pay our commission. At what stage, what is the best stage where we're getting paid? Are we making that part of their like closing costs? Is that it?
Yes, you're paid through escrow at the close of escrow. It's
Okay.
in the buyer's broker's agreement.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So I had some agents ask me that, and they're like, well, what if they don't have the funds? And so I'm like,
Escrow won't close.
escrow won't close. Okay. I wanted to make sure that I was correct on
Right.
that. And then we are covered on our end, right? Because let's say buyer, that's a clear default on the buyer then, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Wanted to
You
make
have
sure.
an agreement by the buyer to pay. Yes.
Okay. So if they
Um,
didn't close, then they could sue for specific performance.
Sure.
Is that correct?
Who could sue for specific
The seller.
performance? The seller could, sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. No, thank you.
But they should seek the advice of their real estate attorney, because we are not attorneys and we cannot give
Right.
legal
I
advice.
May I ask a question on top
I'm
of that?
just
Sure. Sure,
saying.
go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, Rich. It's Michelle Mena.
Yeah.
Based on that, it's just telling me that buyers are going to have to come to the table with a lot more cash, or
Correct. There's a
or
part.
are lenders
I'm
going
not
to
okay.
represent?
I'm not teaching the buyer broker agreement, but I will say in the buyer broker agreement, there is a requirement that the buyer, within X number of days after filling out the buyer broker agreement or signing the buyer broker agreement, they give an additional piece of information, a form that their financial information. I can't remember right off the top of my head what the form is, but it is you have in front of you what their financial situation is. So, and there also is a box that says, I can't pay you. And they can check that. And you can still continue to represent that buyer, saying, I'm going to represent you. Thank you, Tracy. BFPI. I'm going to continue to represent you. So, and I'm going to try to negotiate your obligation to pay me with the seller to have the seller pay me. Now you go through the steps, you do the SPBB, the seller says, I'm not paying anything. At that point, it's in the agreement you can release your response. You can release that buyer, and that buyer can go and forth to with that transaction unrepresented. They can go and you don't represent them. You can also try to negotiate. You can negotiate a referral fee if the seller's broker is willing to do a dual agency. You know, that is an option also. But you have the option. Nobody is expecting anybody to work for nothing. You have that option at that
But at
time.
the point you're making that offer for that client, you're already dug in pretty far in most cases, with spending time with them and effort. So to release them, it's almost like, well, I've done all this work for you until now for nothing. And I don't know, that just does, it just seems
But
so
you've
wrong.
done the work with the anticipation of getting paid by the seller. Here's the other thing, Michelle. That buyer tells you, I don't have money to pay you. So you have a choice. You don't have to take that client.
It
And then
sounds
you've
like
done no
what I'm
work.
gonna do.
I have a question.
I don't
to
know
that,
why,
Rich.
but Michelle, I don't know why you would do that.
Why would I
You-
not take it if they say
Why
they
would
can't?
you not take it? Why would you not take it without knowing whether the seller is willing to pay? You're not, you're possibly leaving money. So I
But
would
I
take
think a
it to
lot of,
that point.
I just think a lot of sellers are gonna feel, and what's the word, emboldened by this whole thing and say they're not gonna pay.
I think that everybody's wrong. I do. I
And
think that this is the way that this is gone. This is the way that we have done business, and um, and in order for this is part of your education on the listing side.
I have two
Your
questions, Rich.
hold on. I'm answering a question. So I think in your listing presentation, in order for the seller to appeal to a mass amount of buyers, they have to at least offer something. They should be offering something. They don't have to, right? But I'm hearing from agents that it really hasn't changed the way sellers have done business. So, okay. So somebody else had a question?
I have a question. I'm in a situation where I just closed escrow with the seller. You know, he paid 5%, half and half, another agent, myself. And now we're out looking for houses. He knows that he's trying to beat this August 17th thing because it hasn't taken effect in his mind. And there's already sellers who are refusing to pay commission. I'm calling them up. I'm asking them if they're offering a commission. Some are offering 1, some are offering 1.5, some are offering 0, but almost all of them are no longer offering 2.5. So now I go back to my buyer and say, we have to sign something. And he's like, just go do the best you can to negotiate. And if you can get what you get out of the seller, then great. That's what I want you to do. And if if they don't pay you, I'll pay you a flat fee of $15,000. So that's kind of like where we are. And he says, I don't want to sign anything until we do all the negotiation, and then we'll figure out what to put on this form. Because we don't know. It's like the wild, wild west out there. I have one transaction, like this late, I don't know who just spoke. I submitted an offer. The agent, the listing agent, encouraged me to submit the offer with the buyer broker to pay the 3%, said, don't worry about it. We're all new to this. We'll figure it out. The seller in turn countered me back, lower price, gave the buyer 25,000, and again took a position. I'm not paying a buyer's agent commission. I'm giving you nothing. but I'll give your buyer 25,000 and he can give it to you. But really what it was, we're in a gap of about $70,000 from what the buyer is offering and the seller's list price is. And he won't come off that list price. And he did come off 25,000 to give a credit to the buyer, which the buyer is trying to turn it into his lower price negotiating buying power. He doesn't want to
Julie,
add
you gotta speed it
back.
up. I got a whole form to go through. I
Okay.
get it. Okay,
I mean,
here's
this is
the
a real
thing.
situation.
Here's Julie, here's the thing. Number one, you don't show a property without a buyer broker agreement signed and with an amount in it. That's number one. That's not only the broker talking, that's NAR talking
Right.
as of August
But
17th.
Oh, we're not August 17th.
I get you. I got it. But this is the way we do business now. So you don't show property until you get something signed. That's the way we do business.
The listing agent assured me that it would all get figured out.
Okay, but then it doesn't. So then you have an agreement with your buyer. Whatever they don't make up, you negotiate with your buyer what he has to make up. Because
Okay,
technically
that's
he has
fine.
to make up the
So
difference.
I got it. The second question is if it comes down to the time of close and your commission is not being paid by the buyer because he now doesn't have enough money because he forgot to counter in closing cost and whatever, can you stop the sale from occurring? Can you say
Escrow
unless I
will
get
not
paid?
close. Escrow will not close the sale until the buyer brings all the money necessary to the table. And there was something somebody else asked previously as to whether can we have. I'm looking for the what was it? Can we have them? This is the way it goes. That if your buyer is paying the commission, then your buyer broker agreement with the amount is given to escrow. They factor in. It's on the closing statement. Yes, it is on the closing statement that this is a money owed by the buyer. So that's what they need to bring to the table to close.
So does it stop the close, or do you have to sue for
Yes,
your?
they don't close. They don't close. Why is this making lines all over? Yes, they don't. They do not close.
I'm seeing a lot of possibilities for lawsuits. Just listening to what's going on here.
Maybe, maybe not. I don't have my crystal ball in front of me, so unfortunately, I couldn't.
As well as I do, Rich. Somebody's going to be mad at this.
Okay, but we all have to remember that this is all coming about because of the lawsuit, because of a lawsuit, and because of the settlement of that lawsuit. That's why we have to change the way we're doing business.
And I understand that completely.
Okay. All right. Angel says we've already procured a buyer to the seller and to just walk away. You're walking into that transaction knowing that if you don't get it paid by the seller, then you are going to release the buyer. That's just it. And if you choose to proceed with that transaction, then that is on you. I mean, I'm sorry. You're choosing, you know the buyer's situation, and you're moving forward, negotiating for that buyer. And if the seller doesn't come through, then that's your choice, because nobody expects you to work for free. Let's see. Okay.
I ask a question, Carrie?
Okay, I really need to move on. So what in specific, can you quickly ask a question?
Yes, it's practical.
About what?
About the form on the table, the BCA, the buyer.
Sure, okay.
So you negotiate the commission with the listing, with the seller, and in terms of practicality, wouldn't you negotiate 5 or 6%, and then a buyer can come along with their additional BRBC, their buyer broker compensation agreement for 2.5? Are we now looking at hypothetically 8% to negotiate? What do you do in that situation?
No, negotiating a 5% commission with your seller is just the same thing as what we're doing now, and splitting that.
Yes,
So
correct.
no, that's what you cannot do. You
Okay.
cannot negotiate a commission for the other side. You can tell them that the other side may ask you to compensate them in the RPA, and that's what that's about. But sellers, listing agents negotiate with the sellers what their commission is. Buyer's agent negotiate with the buyers what their commission is, with the knowledge that you, as the buyer's agent, is going to ask to get paid by the seller in the RPA. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop
okay.
sharing
Thank
because it's
That's okay.
creating a whole bunch of lines. I don't know why I was doing that. Okay. So on to the RLA. Obviously the first document is the agency, and we all know that. Okay, the RLA. So the period, there has to be a beginning and an end date. It cannot be open-ended. It cannot exceed 24 months for California state law. So that's very important. And we're talking about residential 1 to 4. Is it a manufactured home? Somebody's not muted, so make sure you're muted. Is it a manufactured home or probate or a conservatorship? Now here we get to compensation. So you were only negotiating your commission to represent the seller. And that could be a percentage, or that could be a dollar amount. And something just went out of my head. And it is fully negotiated. If the seller wants to pay you 1.5% and you want 2.5%, you negotiate to what you will be paid to represent the seller. For C, excuse me, is this 2C? Additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is not unrepresented. I mentioned that before, that buyer is not represented. You as the listing agent will have to do some paperwork, pass along that paperwork to that buyer who is not represented and who you now have a buyer non-agency disclosure with. That means I don't represent you, and all throughout that document it says I don't represent you. You need to seek the advice of a real estate attorney, and that I will be giving you paperwork back and forth, but I cannot advise you on how to fill it out. So that is an additional compensation.
Okay.
If the buyer is not represented. Okay. It is not dual agency. Okay. Okay. So, and then the continuation of right to compensation for broker identified prospective buyers. That's the safety clause, that X amount of calendar days after the listing period. If somebody that you expose to that property during the listing period comes back after it expires or it is canceled, you are owed a commission. Okay. And you need to give them a list of those individuals. So that's very important. I see agents who don't do that. And so if you don't give them a list, then how are they going to know who is on that list? Or who you're going to claim you expose that property to. And then seller's obligation to pay previous brokers. So if the seller had a listing agreement with somebody else and that broker gave them a list, then they would need to disclose that here. So this is the compensation portion. I'm going to stop here. Any questions regarding this compensation portion of the listing agreement? Okay, so can the list be a new open house sign in sheet? I would not use that as the list. You can take names from that list. I don't think that's I don't think that list is. Yeah, I open houses are. I don't know. I would say no. I mean, you know who you've exposed. If there was a showing, you have the agent's name. A lot of times you don't have the buyer's name. Anybody who put in an offer, that is somebody.
So Rich, if another agent shows the property and you have that buyer's name, that counts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, we don't
Absolutely.
actually have to be the ones showing the property. It could be anybody. I see.
No, you don't have to be the one showing the property. Absolutely not. No. It was during that listing period that a buyer was exposed to that property.
So it's appropriate to ask a listing agent if they request a showing. Could you send me the name of your buyers? And,
Sure.
They should
I've
comply.
had that done before. Yeah.
Are they required to comply, or it's just a courtesy?
They're not required. No.
Okay.
But
So buyers broke.
Say that
Buyers
again.
broke. Do the buyers that go visit open houses have to have a piece of paper buyer agreement already in place with the listing agent before you let them in the house?
No. Okay.
And if they're not represented, can you refuse to let them in the house to avoid problems?
No. Unless the seller has instructed you not to admit unrepresented buyers. If you look at the open house, the new open house sign-in sheet that CAR came in, there's explanations about this, whether you're represented and all of that. Anne says, no, Catherine says, do we submit the buyer rep agreement with the list? You don't have the buyer rep agreement. That's only if you represent you're the listing agent. You need to submit a list. You can say agent Julie Newman showed a buyer on this date. So that could be it. I have a listing that's on hold with an old listing agreement. Should I have her sign a new listing agreement when it comes off hold? Previous listing agreements are modified with a form DM-LA. And and what that does is that informs them that the MLS, this is once the MLS no longer has offer of compensation on the MLS, and that removes that portion of the contract from that listing agreement. I have the seller is willing to offer percentage of the buyer. Would we put that in an addendum to the RPA? No, you would not. Absolutely not. The offer of compensation to a buyer's agent should not go on this form. It is against the settlement agreement. We cannot. That's why CAR removed it. The same with dual agency. If you are representing the buyer on a dual agency, if you bring in a buyer, then you also do negotiate with your buyer a percentage on a buyer broker agreement, or they have a limited buyer broker agreement. If you find this buyer through an open house, negotiate your thing and try to get it paid by the seller. That's what you need to do. Does the list need to be turned over to the seller prior to the expiration? No. There's I think there's a clause that says within X business days. I think it's later in the listing agreement. I'll look for it, but no, it not before the expiration. I think it's within 2 days after the expiration. Okay. So then the rest of the listing agreement is, what's included, what's excluded, what's leased. Is there liened items on the property? Property will be marketed on the following MLS. Primary MLS. FYI, SRAR members, there is no longer a ChrisNet. ChrisNet was owned by SRAR. They gave up their MLS 2 years ago, a year ago. And it's CRMLS. CRMLS is our listing, our MLS. Can you put compensation amount to the buyer's agent in flyers? I will get with that. Yes, hold on. And then E, seller instructs broker not to take or use photographs in marketing. It's a different form. SELI. And you should not take. The only requirement of the MLS is that there be an exterior shot of the property. And that has to go into the MLS within 5 days, not business days, 5 days. Okay, moving on to the next page. Timing of presentation of offers. You don't want to, if your seller wants the offers to be presented on a specific date or X number of days after it's on the MLS. Supplemental offer letters, buyer's letters. Remember, accepting buyer's letters can expose your seller to fair housing violations. It is discouraged that the seller accepts buyer's letters, but it's up to the buyer. BCA, Jimmy, you asked a question about BCA for referrals. Referrals is you have no involvement in the transaction. You're just referring a client, and then you get a referral fee from referring a client. Seller intends to include a contingency to purchase a replacement property. Very important. If your seller has that intention, you need to know that, number one, and you need to disclose that, number two. Failure to do that, it opens yourself up to a lawsuit, because if a seller said, well, I told them I needed to buy a property and blah, 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 it can be a whole mess. So make sure that you, you make sure that you, if that's their intent, then you need to do that. Seller opts out. If they opt out of a key safe or sign, you check that box. So the default would mean that they opt in. So you can see that automatically the broker compensation advisory is attached to this, to the form. We've gone over compensation. Buyer breach and seller recovery again. If the completion of the sale is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the seller, somebody had a question. If seller instruct the agent can put compensation amount to the buyer's agent. And okay, I'm covering that. Hold on, I'm covering that. Is prevented the party to the transaction other than the seller, then compensation which otherwise would have been earned under paragraph 4 shall be payable only if and when the seller collects. That's if they sue the buyer for default, they get money. Technically, you're entitled to half of what they recover. This is where it instructs escrow that to be paid out of escrow, our compensation. Maximum listing period is 24 months per the law. Items included and excluded, seller representations. We had a question regarding, and it was just, hold on. Talks about dual agency and represented buyers. Security, insurance, and showings. Remember, tell your sellers to hide their valuables and remember, hide pills, because those are number one on the theft list. Something that somebody had a question, I'm sorry, and there was somebody had a question on, and I said it's going to be somewhere. Sorry. No, I'm not finding it, and it's not coming to me. I'm sorry. Talks about mediation. And then entity sellers, you know what an entity seller, it's a trust, it's a probate, conservatorship. Use this in place of our representative capacity. And if you see at the bottom, if there are additional agents, there's an addition of the same brokerage, additional agent acknowledgement. There's an AAA form. So you can have more agents added to the contract. If more than one brokerage is representing the seller, then you have to do a co-listing broker information on the ABA form. In regards to if the seller instructs you that they are willing to pay. Well, wait, before I go on to that, I want to go on to the other form that will be used in connection. Before I move off of the listing agreement, is there any questions on the listing agreement? I know there's the marketing question. I will get to that. But there's the other form that we now have to use with the listing agreement is the MLSA. So I want to go over that, but before I go to that, any more questions on the listing agreement besides marketing questions? I'm not seeing any, so we are going to go. Okay, so you will now be using a multiple listing service addendum with the listing agreement, and it explains what the MLS is, remember that was a part of the listing agreement. They've removed that now from the listing agreement, talking about the benefits of the MLS. And then we go into public marketing and clear cooperation. And yes, I know in the news there's talk about getting rid of clear cooperation, but it hasn't been gotten rid of yet. So we are still under clear cooperation policies. So we have to abide by them. And what is clear cooperation? That once a listing agreement is fully executed, if it is not marketed, then it needs to go in to the MLS within 2 days, not business days, 2 days. If it is marketed, then it needs to go into the MLS within 1 day. So that's clear cooperation. So you can also put it in, we have a question. Chris, I'm not understanding what you're asking here. Or if when the BRBC expires, I'm not understanding.
I'm just making a statement.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Okay. So there we have clear cooperation. You can go into coming soon, but the first day of a coming soon listing is the first day of your listing, not after you don't have coming soon, however many days, and then your listing starts. It's the first day of your, the day one of your listing agreement. So this talks about coming soon. Seller instructs broker to begin marketing on a specific date after the first day. So if the seller is not quite ready and you want to hold it not away from the MLS, you do an SCLM. And even though it allows it here in the MLS form, you should also do an SCLM because MLSs can ask for will ask for the SCLM if they see it's marketed, blah, blah, blah. So I would also do the SCLM. So that's if the seller wants it marketed X number of days after the listing goes into effect, or it can be, or you can say don't market it at all through the whole thing, through the whole listing, which also can be changed with a modification of listing. You know, that date can be extended if you have it excluded for the whole listing period. That that can be changed also. If they decide to put it on the MLS, so that can always change. Now, remember, if you're excluding it from the MLS, it can only be marketed within your office and nowhere else. Carrie, the SCLM is the seller exclude listing from multiple listing service. That's the SCLM. But if it is excluded, you cannot publicly market it. That's what clear cooperation prohibits. So just know that. Now, never check clear cooperation policy does not apply because we are under clear cooperation. So property address, features to opt out, they can opt out of internet features. That means it will be in the MLS, but it won't be, it will not be sent out to other third-party entities like realtor.com, Julia, those things. It will only be in the MLS. Okay, here's the crux of this new form. Seller's concessions. So, number 5, concession explanations. Concessions are monetary payments that the sellers agree to contribute towards a buyer's expenses and other costs that a buyer is responsible for in the transaction. Concessions may include, but are not limited to, costs of escrow or title, lender's fees, repairs, inspections, the buyer broker compensation. Concessions identified in an MLS listing are not promises to pay, but instead indicate to the buyer that the seller may consider offers asking for concessions. Concessions specified in the MLS are not intended to be binding on seller unless included in the accepted purchase agreement. What does that mean? It means the SPBB. That's an accepted purchase agreement. Concessions specified in the MLS must be allowed to be used for any permissible buyer expense or cost, and must not specify the concessions are to be used for broker compensation. However, a term in the buyer's offer may specify that the seller agrees to pay all or a portion of the compensation that the buyer owes its broker. That last sentence, what does it refer to? It refers to the SPBB. So, concessions. The seller can offer, so let's go to B. Seller does not authorize broker to put in the MLS that seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions. Or 2, seller authorize broker to put in the MLS that seller is willing to consider offers asking for concessions if allowed under the MLS rules. Even if permitted by the MLS, no amount of the possible concession will be slated in MLS either as a percentage of the purchase price or a flat fee unless seller notifies broker in writing of the amount. Okay. So if the seller authorizes you to say he's willing to consider concessions on your marketing material or on your personal website, you can advertise that the seller is willing to give concessions. If the seller indicates to you in writing that they're willing to pay for the buyer's broker compensation, you can also say that on your personal websites or in your marketing. Sorry. Do not put it in the MLS. Now, certain MLSs, like CRMLS, there is going to be an option as to whether seller is willing or not willing to offer concessions. They had, up until, from what I hear last night or the night before, they were going to give percentages or a dollar amount. As I predicted, when I saw that what CAR was doing, they took that away. It's a yes or no. So if the seller is willing to give concessions, then yes, you can say that in your own personal marketing or your own website. But everybody needs to realize that if the seller says he is willing to do that, that doesn't obligate him to do that unless it's asked for in the RPA as the SPBB and the seller agrees to that. That's the only place where it's binding. So that's really important. That is where the only place where it is binding. Otherwise, it's not binding. It doesn't obligate the seller. Just by saying they're willing to do that or willing to consider, I would say because some MLSs aren't having a concession field, and the jury is out as to whether you can put it in private remarks or not. So I'm not going to tell you to put it in private remarks, because I've heard conflicting theories about that. But on those MLSs that have that switch, for lack of a better term, of yes, you're offering concessions, or no, you're not offering concessions, then I would, then you can market that yes, they're willing to consider offers, asking for compensation or asking for concessions.
Where will that be on this? Where will that be? Like when you go to broker load, where will that be? Near where the commission thing was?
Probably, yes. I know CRMLS is going to have that yes or no. I heard Flex is not. They've decided not. I'm reading a question. The whole question about the DOJ looking at the forms, they're going to be continuing looking at the forms. Will these forms change? We don't know whether they'll change. CAR proactively changed the forms prior to them being released in anticipation of the DOJ. That's why the percentage was removed. That's why the option to offer compensation to the other side was removed. Okay. And so Shauna, I'm a little tongue-tied, so sorry, but there is no dual agency compensation in the listing agreement anymore. If you're doing dual agency, you negotiate your commission for the seller and you negotiate your commission for the buyer, and you ask them to you ask the seller to pay your commission for representing the buyer, and if they don't, then your buyer pays it. The DOJ is the Department of Justice. Somebody had a question about the DOJ. So any more questions on concessions before I move on?
Yeah, but what if the seller tells you, if you represent both sides, I want to reduce the commission,
There is no reduced commission, because you're negotiating your commission to represent the seller, period. So if that was 2.5% or 3%, whatever that percentage was, after you split it, then that's what you are negotiating. So if you're negotiating, and then if you're bringing in the buyer, then you negotiate your commission with the buyer and then ask the seller to pay that. And if not, then the buyer pays it. There is no negotiating a reduced commission for both sides. Okay. If you want to say you're doing 2.5 on the listing side, and so to represent a buyer that I'm bringing in, then you negotiate with your buyer 1% and then ask your seller to pay that.
At the time when the buyer, so there are a lot of things in the air. Like you tell the seller, right now I'm negotiating my commission, and then after that, you know, it's up
And
to you.
then be aware, because remember that that the buyer may ask you to pay for their broker's commission. Are you willing to do that? Have that a conversation. Go over that form that I went over in the beginning. BCA, the Broker's Commission Advisory. Go over that form with them on how we get paid before while you're on your listing appointment. So Serge says 4C is negotiating with the seller for you to also represent you're not representing an unrepresented buyer. You're negotiating more money for an unrepresented buyer, because you are going to have to do more work. You're going to have to pass along the forms and all of that. You're not representing the buyer. Remember that. You are not. And you cannot advise the buyer on anything if they're unrepresented.
Rich, I have
So
a question when you're ready on concession.
sure.
please.
Sure.
So the seller's willing to pay concessions, right? And so
Okay.
the seller's concessions can go for anything, right?
Mhm.
Escrow, title,
Right.
buyer broker. Okay.
Right.
So let's say the seller's offering $30,000 in concessions. And then my buyer goes, oh, it can pay for my closing costs, my this, or this. So my question to you, can we write in our, I know this is out there, can we write in our buyer broker agreement that if seller is offering concessions, that the concessions first go towards our buyer broker fee?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I just read to you at the beginning over here that
Yeah.
what concessions are, that it cannot be earmarked for buyer
Okay.
broker compensation. No, you cannot do that.
All right.
Absolutely not. Okay.
I just thought I had a little fun with you guys, just in case.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Carrie, they haven't figured out leases really. I'm sorry to say. I think I had a conversation with you the other day in that
Really?
there is a form for brokers who are showing property to tenants. It's a buyer broker agreement for tenants, but there's no mechanism really to ask the seller to pay that amount. I would, in the interim, ask them. I would ask them to. I would submit a single. I think we talked about this. A single party compensation or a commission agreement. And Christine, I think I should look it up. If somebody's on CAR forms, look to see if the a lease commission agreement, if that's still up there, if that's still in zip forms, because you could do it that way also, asking the seller, not the seller, I'm sorry, the landlord or housing provider, whatever they're calling them now, to pay the buyer's broker. And that would be either a single party or a commission agreement, any of those going to the housing provider, asking them to pay the buyer, the tenant's broker. Yeah, CAR kind of dropped the ball on that. I don't know what they're thinking there. Okay, moving on. Seller's instructions: visitors are not restricted from taking pictures, and seller instructs broker to publish in the MLS that taking images is limited to those persons preparing appraisals, or meaning that, not anybody, just anybody can come in and take pictures of the property. So, so that is the listing agreement. Before I move on, no, this is the MLSA. Before I move on to one very important document that we as a brokerage are adding, are there any questions about the MLSA? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. So now let's see, where are you? Okay. So starting now and before the MLS, whatever MLS you're on, removes compensation, there is this gap where compensation is offered on the MLS that's CAR, because they want to stay so far away from compensation to the other broker because of the DOJ, that they're not dealing with it. So we as brokerages in this 2-3 week period, because every MLS, for God's sakes, has a different date as to when they are removing compensation. It's like, CRMLS is the 13th, the MLS is the 17th. I heard Conejo is, I think, the 13th. The deserts are doing it like the 7th. It's like all over the place. So there is this gap where we have this new listing agreement, and yet sellers may be willing to offer compensation to the other side in this interim through the MLS. And if they are willing, after you've had the conversation with them, if they are willing to offer that compensation, then you should also add this addendum to the listing agreement. And this is, I thought I had a note on here that that's weird. That this is only to be used from today. If you just take a new listing today until when the date that the MLS removes compensation, and this is all this says. In such time as the new MLS rules and NAR settlement terms take effect in August 2024, which will prohibit the offer of compensation from listing broker to the buyer's broker through the MLS, seller authorizes listing broker to offer compensation in the MLS to the buyer's brokerage in the amount of whatever that amount, negotiated amount is. This commission would be in addition to the commission set forth in the listing agreement. Remember, you're only negotiating in the listing agreement your commission for representing the seller. Okay, so that's what that refers to be paid to the listing broker. Once the new rule takes effect, seller understands and agrees that no further offer of compensation from the listing broker to buyer's broker will be part of the listing agreement or the MLS offering. So from now, today, until, once again, till that is removed from your MLS, whatever date that is, you have the capability, after explaining to your seller and your seller agreeing to pay compensation to the listing broker, you would use this form to do so. And then you can, in the MLS, put what that cooperating broker compensation is. Okay? So, any questions on this?
This doesn't cover existing listing agreements, correct?
Existing listing agreements are under the existing listing agreement. which means you would have theoretically negotiated a 5 or 6% commission and then put in that line that you're sharing that commission with you're cooperating with the buyer's broker and giving them X amount of dollars or percentage. So that doesn't change that. This is only if you're taking a listing today and up till the offer of compensation goes away.
What if you have a listing and it's, hopefully it will sell quickly, but let's say it doesn't, and it's still on the MLS on August 17th and it will be falling off, right?
Right,
So
right.
then you have to
It won't
cover
fall
yourself.
off. It's the compensation will fall
Right,
off.
that
Right.
part will fall off. So
Right.
then you have to say something. I mean, agents may come back and say, oh, I saw something there, but at the same time, the seller might say, what do we do now? Or ask, how do we handle that?
Well, on the day that it is removed, you have a different form. Well, let me go back to that. Wait, hold on. You have a different form on the day that it's removed. It's D, right? It's D. Sorry, hold on.
MTLA?
No, DMLA. Okay. So, okay, now. Once again, on the day that this is removed, the compensation is removed, this form, disclosure and modification to listing agreement. Now, this is existing listing agreements that were under the old listing agreements where you were sharing compensation. So this informs the seller that offering compensation to brokers representing buyers through the MLS. And it says that we're no longer doing that. And then B says, need to modify the listing agreement. Seller and broker agree it is mutually beneficial to modify the listing agreement to allow your property to be exposed to as many buyers as possible once the MLS changes to reflect the NAR settlement. Broker agrees to notify seller once you could do this now, I guess. It's talking about the future. To notify seller once the MLS will no longer be able to use to offer compensation to buyer's broker. Broker also agrees to discuss the various ways a buyer's broker may be compensated. Once again, go over those ways that they can be compensated. Offer concessions. You can, through the RPA, you can agree to pay the buyer's broker, all those things. Broker agrees to discuss the various, okay, I did.
Rich?
Yes.
Hi, it's Tracy. Hi, I just wanted to say that I think this form is intended to be used now for listings that we have now.
It can be used now,
Yeah.
but it also can be used once the thing goes into effect.
Right, I was
Okay?
just answering Michelle's question.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Okay. Seller agrees that the listing agreement term authorizing broker to cooperate with and compensate brokers participating through the MLS will no longer be in effect as of the date the MLS prohibits such offers of compensation. Seller and broker agree that the total compensation shall be reduced by the amount authorized to be offered in the MLS, meaning that the offer of compensation will be reduced by the amount that you were offering the other side. So if you were offering the other side 2.5% and there was a total of 5%, then the offer compensation is automatically reduced to 2.5%. So that's what you would need to do with existing listing agreements. Okay. Any questions on this?
Rich, what does it mean if you click shall not? Why is there a shall not option? What does that mean?
That means that it stays the same percentage that it was before.
And it
And
only would go to you and wouldn't be split anymore.
it would not be split.
Okay.
And you would need to disclose that to the seller. And I don't know of any seller who would want to pay that
No,
amount.
exactly. I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure that
Yeah.
I understood that correctly. Thank you.
Yeah, Mitra, yes, there is no compensation to the other side. And regarding emailing the forms are all available with the exception of this KW addendum on which will go out to compliance, and your individual compliance officers will have that form. But all the forms that I discussed are on zip forms.
Mitch?
Yeah.
Carrie, may I ask, what is the form if I likely am taking a listing tomorrow? What is the gap form called? What are the acronyms or initials or?
There is none because it's a KW addendum.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, anybody have any questions? Any questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Okay, Rich, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So when we go out on a listing, not let's say after the gap period, okay, so it's beginning okay. What forms would you what forms should we take with us as a listing agent?
You should
what
take
are
the BCA, which is the brokerage compensation advisory. You should take the listing agreement. You should, and you should take the MLSA. And anything that's attached to those. I think there's a seller's advisory attached to the listing agreement. You know, the agency disclosure obviously is attached. Other than that, whatever's on the, do I have this up? I don't have this up. Whatever forms that, the KW affiliated business, but those, the CAR forms are those that I just mentioned.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Somebody else had a question? The DIA. Thank you, Jasmine. The DIA, which
yes.
is Disclosure Information Advisory. Yes.
Yes. So are there the existing listing that we have right now? Do we need to add any additional forms to it?
No.
No.
Nope.
Okay. All right.
Anything else?
Where can we find a list of the mandatory forms that are current? Is there like a place where we can,
They're in
it?
command. Number one, they're in command. I just finished. I need to add this new addendum to the listing side. I just finished the new checklists on my way out. And so those checklists will be uploaded into the command also. Once they are
Where in command? Which area in command would that be?
Talk to compliance. I don't know where exactly in command, but it's you can always email whatever office your compliance at forward. What is it? Compliance. I gotta find it. Bambi, yes, you would use it for leases also. Raha's compliance at Larchmont. Claudia, compliance at forward1.com. That's Claudia for West Side and Calabasas, and Christian is at Studio City. Any other questions? Anything else?
Hi, Rich. I have another question in the listing agreement, paragraph C24C. Can you explain that one more time? So that has nothing to do with the buyer's commission.
C24C. Wait,
On the first page, I guess.
wait, hold on.
Yeah, right there.
C2 is if the buyer is unrepresented. If a buyer comes in unrepresented, meaning they don't have a broker, and you are not representing them as a dual agent. If they're unrepresented, you can negotiate with your seller. Hey, Mr. Seller, they're not represented. I won't be representing them, but I'm going to have to do a little extra work in giving them extra documents, getting them back and forth. Would you pay me an X amount of percentage more to do that? That's what that is about.
Oh, thank you. So that forward living addendum doesn't cover my new buyer addendum?
No, forward living, let's be clear. The forward living addendum is only to be used on listing agreements that are taken from now until the offer of compensation is removed from the MLS. For the MLS, it's the 17th of August. Other MLSs, it's different dates.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
By the way, Rich,
anything?
for the great classes that you have provided us throughout time. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Thank you. All right, this is it. Thank you so much. I have had the pleasure of being your broker for various years, depending on what office it is. So I want to thank you all, and I wish you all the best. I'm sure our paths will cross somewhere, somehow again. And I want to thank you again. And so take care, and until we meet again. All right.
Thank
Take
you
care.
so much, Rich.
Bye.
Thank you. In the desert.